Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. I'd also like to thank the organiser of Railtex, because when I'm not busy running this railway, I'm also chairman of the Railway Benefit Fund, RBF, and very kindly we've allowed the RBF team to circulate and try and encourage members of the railway industry to support RBF. So there's my pitch and plug to start with, but it is the charity of the railway organisation, of which we are all members. So I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so taking you through some slides which I hope will explain to you some of these key things here. We're going to talk a lot about the whole system railway. A lot of the findings, a lot of the gains that we've had over the last 3 years have really come from looking at this railway as one system and the benefits that we see when we do that. And I'll give you some examples of what we found. And I'll be able to answer some of these 3 questions for you: what the Alliance is, how does it work, and what has been achieved, okay? And then, if you like, in the context of the South Western Railway, which is indeed an enormous railway. The South Western Railway, effectively the South West Trains franchise services on the Wessex route running into London Waterloo. Waterloo, of course, is the busiest station in the country, just shy of 100 million passengers a year. And when you add in Vauxhall and Clapham, which are just outside London, then you end up with an enormous amount of people travelling towards London. Carry twice the number of passengers we did 20 years ago, despite using essentially the same infrastructure. And I remember when I was running that railway 20 years ago, the trains were really busy then. So you can just imagine the level of crowding that we now see on a really intensely used railway. It's a really important railway, apart from the people that use it. Economically, it's a huge important part of London, and the passenger revenue at over £1 billion a year, on an industry total really of £8.5 billion, that £1 billion a year of passenger revenue just on the South West Trains network has a huge impact on the total revenue for the whole industry. Very profitable route, very important route for the UK rail industry. So in creating Alliance, we have brought together the obligations, costs and income from both South West Trains and the Network Rail route to create one organisation. It isn't a legal entity, it runs in parallel, but with one management team overlooking the entire organisation. And what we've been trying to do is create aligned objectives so that actually the big challenges that we have allow us to focus on what the right way to solve the problems are, the best solutions we can find, irrespective of whether it's right for Network Rail or right for South West Trains. We'll use the best solution. We share finances in the organisation between Network Rail and South West Trains. So if I want to add cost into Network Rail to deliver overall efficiency for South West Trains, we can do that, and then the costs get shared back between the two organisations on a 50-50 basis. Conversely, if South West Trains can do something cheaper or more effective than Network Rail can, we might add a cost in South West Trains and take the benefit in Network Rail. So again, the things you normally can't do in this industry, we can do by nature of our financial arrangements. But of course, South West Trains aren't the only user of the Wessex route. Arriva Cross Country, in fact, I shall use one of their trains from here back to Basingstoke shortly. Freightliner, many other really important customers on the route. And one of the key challenges was to make sure we could operate in an alliance without jeopardising the relationship with these other companies, or even worse, their contractual position. And I'm delighted that after 3 years, we've actually not had a single challenge from any of the other operators with regards to how the relationship between South West Trains and Network Rail has not predicated their interests or rights. Which isn't to say I've always delivered for them what we wanted to do, but nevertheless, the intent has always been quite clear. And as always with the railway, we've involved everyone else that needs to be involved. So before we set off on this journey, a lot of collaboration and work with the trades unions involved, of course our staff members, and the rail regulator, and indeed the ORR restructured the way that they regulate the Alliance area to make it more effective by having one single regulator covering both safety and economics. So lots of really good industry support. Some of the things that have really helped, undoubtedly, some of the key wins that we've had, it just provides instant clarity over operational decision making. This railway is on the edge, it's incredibly busy, and there is no opportunity to, if you get it wrong, then the consequences are significant, both in terms of passengers and in terms of revenue loss. So having a single command structure where actually there is a clarity around what our expectations are when things go wrong, or indeed making decisions, has really, really helped and allow us to reduce the delays that we have seen. So when an incident takes place, we now can recover from that incident far faster than we used to be able to. Actually, it was less about the contractual view of Network Rail than South West Trains, but what it was is you may have had an operations person in South West Trains, an operations person in Network Rail, and they just had different views. They were both professionally qualified, both well-meaning, but actually, as you'll inevitably find, if you put two engineers in the room, they'll come up with a different way of solving the same problem. Same true of operators. So actually, just having one person rather than two gives an immediate benefit. So we've been able to make a whole load of decisions faster and more simply. We've been able to add contingency, which is absolutely fundamental to how we operate our railway. So when bad things happen, and you see the big tree across the line there, actually the focus isn't on whose fault is it, the focus is on how do we recover from this really, really quickly. During the very severe storms of 2013-14 winter, we had 25 landslips and over 107 trains hit trees like that one. And yet actually the focus of the entire organisation was on how do we keep trains running safely rather than apportioning blame. And it goes beyond South West Trains and Network Rail. In our wider circle, Siemens, who maintained those trains for us, repaired those 107 trains, and I never heard that figure until after the job was done. Quite an incredible achievement of collaboration and working together. You'll be getting the fact that actually I passionately believe that that is the only way that we can operate a whole system railway in the way that we're currently organised. Our passengers and employees have noticed the benefits, and our National Rail Passenger Survey results of specifically how we deal with disruption have improved. So, plenty of good things there. And indeed, that's Waterloo International. It was shut for 7 years. It was used bizarrely as a theatre for part of that time. It was a great show, but it's crazy having the busiest railway station in the country with 5 spare platforms sitting next to them being used as a theatre. So very quickly, we opened that station, albeit in a temporary format, and you can see it in use there. We use it on days of disruption, several times last week and again this morning. What it means is the disruption was less bad than it would otherwise have been. Clearly, these guys walking off this platform were not going to be happy. They would have been even more unhappy if they'd been stuck outside waiting for a platform in the main station to become clear. So it's about contingency and the ability to make decisions like that really quickly and implement it through some amazing scaffold work, if you get a chance to see Waterloo, was something that you just wouldn't have seen outside of the Alliance environment. Of course, it's all about our customers because they're the ones that pay the £1 billion. Ultimately, all of the innovation and the fantastic things that we're seeing in this hall today are paid for by the customer's money. Increasingly, as taxpayer support quite rightly reduces, the passenger becomes ever more important. So clearly here, we've been able to demonstrate how we've been able to make a difference to our customers. And again, having Network Rail staff on the front line actually talking to customers has really helped bring them into understanding what it's all about. Quid pro quo was that we gave our Network Rail employees free travel so they could experience the benefit of using the train at the weekend, perhaps taking their family to London and enjoying the industry in which they work in, and also when it goes wrong, see the consequences and just how bad sometimes we can be. But of course, working collaboratively is a difficult thing. The legal documentation was that thick and cost £1 million to put together, but nevertheless, it's the relationships that hold the Alliance together. And when we get into that, then of course, what you're trying to achieve is to run 2 separate organisations as if they are one, which again sounds simple and logical, and everyone gets the vertical integration bit, but trying to run 2 organisations in parallel is actually quite a difficult task. So, for example, we had 2 headquarters. There are 2 different IT systems. Network Rail's IT system is not compatible with South West Trains' IT system. It's a great thing that the rail industry is clearly better at collaboration than Microsoft and some of other IT suppliers, where it's very difficult to do something as simple as getting an electronic diary invitation sent from a Network Rail computer onto South West Trains one. And yet, actually, that's a really important part of running any modern business, isn't it? So we mustn't forget that some of these core hygiene factors need to be in place to allow an organisation to run properly. And indeed, the trust, some of the challenges about the length of the existing franchise, and the fact that fundamentally alliances require compromise, it creates a real challenge for the management team. So great benefits, but also some significant challenges. These multi-purpose vehicles, of course, which are essential to the way that we keep the lines clear from during the autumn with railhead cleaning and during the winter with third rail de-icing, previously were contracted to a number of different organisations from Network Rail, and the delivery and reliability for a number of reasons was actually quite poor. The understanding actually of the team that were responsible for them as to what they were actually trying to achieve was quite poor. These are now maintained by the SWT fleet team and driven by South West Trains drivers, and actually just that change in driver thing has made a big difference, because the passenger train drivers know exactly where it's slippy. They know exactly where to make sure the rail is cleanest, and they really understand the consequence of not coming into work. So, you know, if it's a dark winter's November night and you're feeling a bit poorly, what do? Do you call in sick and cancel the machine? Or do you actually really, really put yourself out? Because you know that if you don't do your night shift and clean the rails off overnight, then the trains in the morning will be in a much worse condition. So this really gets people in different levels of emotion. It's been a real success, and it's reduced the cost by about half in running those machines than previously was the case, as well as improving quality. I mean, the Alliance came about really because of the McNulty report and the real challenge to the industry to talk about alignment. There's no doubt that some of the big questions and challenges that McNulty posed, perhaps less answered in solution, was to allow us to understand how are we aligned, where do those interfaces actually create more challenge, and how do we come together as an industry to work collaboratively so that we can work around or through those contracts. There was absolutely no doubt that very early on we identified that despite the privatisation model being very, very successful in many areas, I mentioned the fact that passenger numbers have doubled and revenue has increased by about 4 times, there's absolutely no doubt that on those interfaces there were challenges. Interestingly, the way that the route, the Network Rail employees and the South West Trains teams used to focus on train performance, which is clearly core to delivering the service, was actually focusing inevitably on the contractual regime that existed between those two organisations. There was collaboration, they were working together positively through that regime. But actually what we weren't looking at was what we call sub-threshold delays. Now, sub-threshold delays should be the biggest news story for the rail industry in terms of performance. Because actually, whilst the contractual regime has done a fantastic job at driving economic incentive towards improving performance, sub-threshold means that those minutes don't get counted. They have no value, and they don't get counted. So actually, it's quite difficult to work out how many of them there are. And actually, on a busy network like ours, about 60% of the total delay that we see is sub-threshold, outside the contractual regime. So straight away, by changing the way that the organisations are working together, we saw a part of our railway, when we looked at the whole system, rather than just the bits where we were contractually tied together, we saw a whole bunch of delay, a whole load of issues that previously we just hadn't been focusing on. And we now have created the first industry sub-threshold delay programme. If you think that managing delays of 5 or 6 minutes is difficult, when you're looking at managing delays of 10, 20, 30 seconds, both in terms of capturing those delays have happened and then dealing with them, that's a whole level of granularity harder. But that's the only way that we're going to run more and more capacity on a railway that is so busy. So we've moved away from just looking at the contracts to look at the much wider picture. We absolutely understand that overcrowding has a much larger part in our punctuality challenges than we previously understood. Again, you see that through sub-threshold. You don't see overcrowding affecting whole minute delays very often. You do see this in the way that we now see it. And with passenger numbers doubling without seeing a corresponding increase in infrastructure capability, I guess that shouldn't be a surprise. And I'm going to talk a little more about the way that we currently focus on infrastructure maintenance and renewal in the way that actually that we need to move forward to deliver what I call TRM, total route modernisation, a phrase that some of you have heard before, and I shall talk about in a later slide. Because how we invest in the railway, the work we do, and how we get the benefit from it, ultimately in passenger satisfaction and revenue, there's more work to do there to get more benefits. So everyone talks about the wheel-rail interface, and of course we've brought that together. And we could see quite clearly that whilst performance has been moving up and down over the years, before the Alliance started in 2010-11, but basically we hadn't identified as a whole railway system many of the inputs and outputs and the effect that was having on our most important asset, that of our track. Project Delta is our solution to that. Basically, that's about doing more maintenance. We've been doing that for 3 years now, and we're seeing the benefits. So our track delays last year reduced by 25%. And then really focusing on going forward, I'm absolutely convinced that the way we achieve a better overall efficiency as an industry is by having a much better view about how we make our investments. So in some of the big renewals projects we're doing over the next few years, we're bringing together all of the work we're doing from any type on all of the assets, looking at how we can coordinate that into one piece of work with an access regime that maybe closes some quite important bits of railway for some quite long periods of time to allow the work to be done properly. Let's get those sleepers lined up properly first time. It will be safer, and it does actually cause less disruption, because doing work in 2.5 hours overnight is neither efficient, and it definitely doesn't lead to a quality product. Again, these are not things I'd have been talking about had I been making this address 3 years ago. In terms of the supply chain, I'm very privileged to be on the council of the Railway Supply Group that was recently established. If you're not familiar with the work of the Railway Supply Group, then have a look at the website. Rupert at the back there, if you stick his hand up, will be able to give you details of RSG's website. Again, I'm a real convert in this area because I just hadn't understood how fundamental it is that because it is a whole system, if we have weaknesses in any part of our supply chain, ultimately that will result in a poor impact for our passenger. It's obvious when you say it like that, but actually the industry model we've been working to, and perhaps the way we work with one another, hadn't made that clear. The amount of work and opportunity that you lose through poor reliability of a piece of plant or kit in that most valuable commodity that we have overall, which is time and access to the railway, is quite appalling on many occasions. And that's not just to blame the person that's supplying the piece of kit, because if the contractual environment they're working in isn't supporting investment and isn't helping the industry overall to achieve us to grow that £1 billion, then it's no surprise that the kit's unreliable, but we can't tolerate it. So I talked about sub-threshold delay. I'm not going to go through all these things in total, but again, you can see how many initiatives there are here. They're all focusing from obvious little things like more station staff blowing more whistles, helping to get passengers onto trains quickly, to making sure that we never, ever, ever have a speed restriction like I've got this morning, which meant I've had to cancel services that are full of passengers trying to get to Waterloo but can't because we have a speed restriction on. Just a speed restriction alone is enough to mean you can't get all the trains that you want to run through a section of line at a critical place like Wimbledon. The whole industry has to come together, and it's all about speed restrictions, it's about consistency, and it's everyone involved working together. So it's a really substantial plan to focus on that. And then a few slides now just talk about our biggest challenge, which is actually about how we deal with that rising passenger numbers. Because the number of passengers we've seen is increasing, and the passenger numbers basically is that. The increase in capacity is the red line, and you can see the red is increasing a lot slower than the blue. So we're working really hard to find ways of increasing capacity. One of the big achievements of the Alliance has been to develop a scheme in just 2 years, which has seen these trains ordered during the summer from a scheme that didn't exist 2 years ago, with a plan to allow us to rebuild substantial parts of Waterloo during the summer of 2017. We've got more to go at because the main line in from places like Winchester actually are already full. We already operate 24 trains an hour. You can't run more than that sensibly on a conventional railway. So how do we get more passengers onto those trains? They're as long as they can be, and we're running as many as we can. So again, only by working together as an industry are we able to come up with some really interesting solutions. Perhaps double-deck is the way forward. And all of this is important to make sure that we keep moving the top line forward to pay for all of this enhancement. Technology has a role. These will be installed on many of our trains from next year to allow the driver to have a better sight of the speed we want the driver to follow, to make sure that we can optimise every last bit of capacity. So all of the Zero trains are having those driver advisory systems installed in a £10 million project. Going further out, then are we looking at Crossrail 2, for example? Are we looking at a 5th track into Waterloo? In-cab signalling on automatic trains, perhaps. I don't know, but I've got passengers standing today, and whilst I love the idea of automatic signalling, I'm not sure I can wait a generation for it. So, in summary, some key things there which I would demonstrate to me that the Alliance has worked well. we've all learned a lot. The managers involved, the staff members involved, have all learned a great deal about an industry that we already thought we had a pretty good knowledge of. And there's a great deal more to come. I think for me that slide sums it up, because that's what Waterloo International will look like in 2018, which in railway terms is very small, for a concept that's been developed in 2 years, which previously didn't exist. So you'll make your own minds up, but thank you for listening today, and I'm happy to take questions for a short period of time.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you.